So welcome everyone this evening. Welcome to How to Revise. This is our first student webinar of the year actually, which is exciting. My name is Mariota. I organise the events here at MyTutor, and we've organised this How to Revise event today for you because we really want to help you revise your best this exam season. I know with the pandemic, the last couple of years, a lot of exams that would normally have happened were cancelled, and education has just been so disrupted anyway. And even in a normal year, revising is hard. You think, you've got to learn everything for each of your subjects, but then revision in itself is really its own whole skill. But luckily here at MyTutor, we have thousands of revision experts in the form of our fabulous tutors. And today we're joined by one of our equally fabulous tutors called Jack, who's also trying to think equal, but Jack is amazing. And Jack is also one of the winners of our Tutor Award from last year. So out of thousands of entries, Jack was awarded the Best Success Story Tutor Award, which was very inspiring to read about. Jack is also completing his Masters in Computer Science at Durham University, before he steps out into the world. So Jack has many years of revision and exam experience. And so just before I hand over to Jack, while Jack is telling us his top tips and skills for revision, you can ask any questions you like, and there's at the bottom of your Zoom screen there's a little button that says Q&A. So if you add in your questions in there, and in the last 15 minutes today, we're going to try and get through as many of those as we can. So without further ado, over to you, Jack.
Brilliant. Okay, I think should be sharing now. Fantastic.
Yeah, you can see the screen. Cool.
Thank you for the introduction. That's very flattering. Just to sort of start off, I suppose just to introduce myself a little bit, make myself a bit more personable. I'm Jack. I'm currently finishing my Masters in Computer Science. For anyone who's interested, it's a bit more cybersecurity focused. I might talk a bit about it at the end if anybody is into computer science or wants to study there. I've been tutoring since January 2019, so I actually started in my first year at university, sort of after first term had just finished. So I kind of recommend it as something to do when you all go off to university. It's a really cool job on the side, and it sort of makes you feel a little bit more confident with your own studies as well. It's really rewarding. And also just kind of a fun thing about me, I'm the president of my college rowing club. So the sort of picture shown is me getting held up by the novice team, because I do quite a lot of coaching with them, and I really enjoy it. So just a little bit about today. So we're going over quite a lot of revision skills, but I kind of want to preface it by saying that revision is very tricky and it is very personal. The way you work will fluctuate throughout the year, throughout kind of what you're doing, which subjects you're focusing on, and as you continue with studying throughout the years as well. The way I studied at GCSE and A level was completely different between the two, and it's completely different to how I study now. I like to think that I studied quite well, especially during my A levels and at points in university, but it still changes. It's going to change year to year based on what your schedule's like. I know that I'm not much of a morning person, so this year I've tried to focus a lot more on being better at studying in the afternoon and sometimes in the evening, rather than kind of forcing myself to get up super early to do work. But out of everything that I'm telling you, just remember there's no sort of one golden way to work. There's no one specific way to do it. It's kind of dependent on you. So hopefully a few of the things that you learned today, you can kind of take in yourself and maybe give them a go, try them out and see whether they work for you as well. But anyway, here's the plan for today. So I'm going to do my best to sort of shove my inner mathsy side away and give you a more general talk on revision. So hopefully there's something here for everyone doing all kinds of subjects. We're going to start off chatting a bit about sort of the science behind learning and how you can put yourself in the best state to learn stuff as quickly as possible, which is, of course, what we're all interested in doing. Then we'll get into some of my revision techniques and time managing skills that I've learned mostly over the course of university that have kind of managed to save me quite a lot of time and mean I'm studying less and a bit more efficiently. So that's stuff like Pomodoro and time boxing. And then finally, we'll end on some sort of general tips on how to stay calm, make a plan, and kind of get all your revision done in time. We'll have a few polls throughout. So I think we just had one on sort of where everybody's from and what subjects they're doing, which is the next slide, so I'll skip through that. Please feel free to ask questions. It would really help me out at the end to give me more to talk about. I think we're answering all of them at the end, and I can't see the chat while I'm presenting, so just keep that in mind. I'm not sort of ignoring you or anything, but we'll have plenty of time to do questions then. Okay, so first of all, what not to do. I had a little bit of fun making this because it's pretty much based on all stuff that I actively do when I'm trying to revise, even now. So the first big one is all-nighters. Sleep is really, really important for sort of good, well, revision, which I'm sure is fairly obvious to say. But do not feel pressured into doing all-nighters if you have an essay or a coursework deadline. You know, talk to your teachers or try to plan a little bit further ahead. Doing an all-nighter is the absolute sort of, it absolutely destroys you for a week. Speaking from experience, because of course I've done all-nighters, especially in first and second year when I was a little bit more disorganized. It will affect your sleeping patterns for a week to come. You will not feel good for it. And then sort of going on from there, extremely long study sessions. So regular breaks are quite important. Your brain gets tired just like the rest of you. So try not to sort of sit and study for more than 2 or 3 hours without taking a long break. We'll kind of get onto techniques that you can do to make sure that you're taking regular breaks and stay well rested and everything. But studying for 12 hours straight is much less effective than studying 2 hours a day for 6 days. You'll learn tons more and you'll remember tons more, importantly, if you break it up a little bit. Of course, don't sit with distractions. So I'm quite guilty of going on my phone. There's like sort of little mini breaks when I shouldn't be when I'm studying. Even when I'm kind of at the university library, which should be a place of focus, I'm still pretty easily distracted by my phone if I sort of get a text from one of my friends, or, you know, sometimes I'll just sort of scroll through Facebook or something if I get a little bit bored. My absolute number one that I'm guilty for is YouTube, especially if I'm sitting at home at my desk in my room like I am now. I go on some of the weirdest YouTube rabbit holes just to watch something that's not to do with work, even if I don't particularly enjoy it. So if you're kind of like me, try to be self-aware about what distracts you and try to remove yourself from them. You can kind of think of it as, you know, if you do a really focused hour of revision, really focused hour or two, then you don't really have to worry about doing work for the rest of the day. You can kind of remove that guilt, that feeling of, you know, I should be doing something, and then you can spend the rest of your time actively relaxing and doing something you enjoy. I tend to find that if I watch YouTube during my work, and let's say it takes me twice as long to do, then that's just an hour or two less that I have time to do things that I actually enjoy, like, I don't know, going out with friends in the evening or playing video games or something, or maybe watching YouTube videos that I actually enjoy. So try to keep that sort of reference in mind, that you want to make your working as efficient so that you can actually do things you enjoy with your time when you're done. And then the last few I've kind of already mentioned, but sort of messing with your sleep is bad, don't skip breaks, and catastrophizing. So what I mean by this is, obviously there's quite a lot of pressure with your GCSEs and A-levels. Respectively, for all of you, they'll be the biggest exams that you've probably sat up until this point in your educational careers. But try not to go down the rabbit hole of, you know, oh, what happens if I fail this exam? Like, what happens if I just forget everything on the day? Because realistically, you're not going to forget everything. Your teachers know you quite well. Your predicted grades, which you've been getting for years from school, are generally quite sort of accurate. You can definitely put things in place to make sure you're not going to forget, like preparing with revision. So it's not really worth thinking about the worst case all the time. So try to stay in a positive frame of mind. Sort of constantly thinking about consequences won't help you. But if it is something that you really struggle with, then I'm sure your teachers would be happy to talk to you about it and kind of reassure you, or any sort of tutors or family that you might talk to about your studies as well. So on to sort of my first topic. I promise this won't be sort of too nerdy. It's just a few things that I learned during A-levels that I found quite interesting. So first thing, learning scientifically is when our brain takes stimuli from our senses and produces new memories. So over time and lots of sleep, these memories turn into long-term memories, or basically what we call understanding. So you may have heard the analogy that our brain works a little bit like a muscle before, which is oddly quite true. So a bit like warming up when we want to do exercise and stretching before we exercise, we need to do the same things with our brain if we want to learn efficiently and create memories faster. So the way we can do this is by working under the right conditions. So I'll kind of mention a few of the things that you can do in order to make your brain a bit more stretchy. So surprisingly, the one that I found quite weird when I learned it is that the right amount of stress can actually be quite helpful when you're learning. So too little or too much stress obviously is associated with lower academic performance. There's been quite a few studies on it, which makes quite a lot of sense, because if you're super chilled out, you're just kind of reading your textbook on the sofa, or you've got YouTube in the background while you're trying to learn something, you're probably not going to remember it as well, because you're not focused on it. It's not the kind of main thing that you're trying to learn at that point. But then equally, if you're super stressed out, if you're really worried about an exam coming up, you're probably more focused on whatever is making you stressed or worried rather than what you're actually trying to learn. So what I mean by an optimal amount of stress probably isn't what you kind of associate stress to be. It's more things like discussing in a group. So working with your friends and testing each other and asking each other questions, kind of stepping outside of your comfort zone. So it might be changing revision topics semi-regularly, so you don't get too comfortable doing the same thing. Maybe you've spent a lot of time recently on one topic that you started to find quite easy, and you just kind of retake notes and re-summarize notes constantly on that same topic, which is something that I do all the time, because it's really satisfying and it's really easy and it makes you feel like you're doing loads of work. But in actuality, that's quite a relaxed way of working, and it's maybe not the most productive when you've got more sort of difficult or more important work to be doing at that point. So just an analogy on this, because the right amount of stress is different for everyone. A classic scenario that I'm sure we can all kind of relate to is when you've kind of dozed off in a lesson and the teacher starts randomly picking on somebody to answer something. Your name gets called and you don't even remember what question's been asked because you were so out of it. It happened to me all the time, even in year 13. Obviously that's going to induce like a ton of stress in you, and you're probably going to feel a bit put off and a bit kind of worried about that for the rest of the lesson. And that would be an example of kind of too much stress. You're not going to be as focused because you're a little bit worried. But if you were kind of alert anyway, and you are able to answer the question and you don't sort of feel too put off by it, or maybe you just kind of like answering questions in class, then it's a good amount of stress, because you're going to feel a little bit more sort of, I guess, a tiny bit uncomfortable, but mainly just outside of your comfort zone, and it's going to be quite helpful. Again, this depends on everyone, so that's kind of why I picked that analogy, because some people hate it and some people love it. So just keep that in mind. So remember, step outside of your comfort zone, do the hard topics first, do your practice papers under time conditions, don't just kind of take as long as you need, treat them like exam papers, study in groups and support each other, are my sort of big tips for this one. And then of course I couldn't really do revision tips without mentioning the ones that everybody talks about, so I won't spend too much time here. But basically sleep, very, very important. Some statistics there: 20.6% better memory with sleep. So there was a study done that deterministic memory, which is basically just how well you remember straight up facts, is way, way better in the morning with participants who have slept recently compared to the evening. That doesn't mean don't work in the evening. It just means sleep regularly, and you'll have better memory effectively. So it's kind of free revision. Obviously sleep more if you're working a lot. So if you're in a period of quite high stress, like I'm sure a lot of you going into exam season, sort of the finalists amongst you are, especially around sort of May, June time, make sure you're sleeping a little bit more than you're used to. Stress and revision does take it out of you. You are expending more energy than usual. It'd be like running during the day. if you were constantly exercising, you would expect to sleep more. So you should expect the same if you're working too. No all-nighters, mucks you up for a week. Don't skip meals. Food is energy. Same thing as sleep. Eat healthy, varied, don't change things, don't skip meals. If you like exercising, if it's a way of relaxing, try not to cut that out of your routine, try to work around it. And if you're not so big a fan of exercise, you probably have some other way of relaxing and getting time to yourself. So make sure you're still doing all of the things that, you know, bring you joy. Whatever sort of you do when you're alone. So maybe you read, or you play video games, or you watch YouTube or Netflix or something. Make sure you're still making time for that. It's good to unwind, and a bit like when you're sleeping, you form those memories and you kind of bring your revision to light when you're relaxing. You can't just be sort of going the entire time. Right, so we'll kind of do another poll, I think, if it works. So what is your favorite place to study? So I think there's a few options already built in. I'm not sure how to launch it. There we go. Thank you. Can we do the other one? Sorry, the favorite place to study. Thanks, Mariota. It's okay.
The wrong thing. Favorite way to study. We'll come back to that one.
Sorry, do you want me to sort of keep going, or? Brilliant. So these are some of the places that I tend to work. So if you do have another one that I haven't thought of, then feel free to write it in the chat. Just kind of anecdotally, while you're answering a few of those, my number one ambition for when I graduate is to not have a desk in my bedroom, because I've had a desk in my bedroom since I was 14, and I absolutely cannot stand working in my room. I get nothing done. I just watch YouTube all day. So yeah.
I'm also sick of working in my room, and I never want to have a desk in my room again either.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a pipe dream. Maybe next year, if I end up living in a flat or something and not moving back home.
Don't dream too high.
Yeah, keep it realistic.
Stay humble. Cool, we'll just share these results.
Yeah, that's fair enough. My room was probably also my favorite place to work when I was still at school. Yeah, so point of this poll as well is just to kind of bring your attention to other places you can work. Sometimes it is good to vary it up a little bit. Obviously, if your room works for you, then please keep doing that. Don't let my pessimism about it put you off. But I remember when I was doing my A-levels, I would usually either work in my room or at school, obviously. So during my free periods at A-level, that was quite a big one for me. So rather than sort of going home or anything, I would just try and do all of my homework in my free periods so that I could just do revision when I got home. And it took the pressure off me slightly, because I knew that if I didn't do revision when I got home, all of my kind of compulsory homework, stuff that people were going to check, was already done. So it kind of made me feel a little bit more relaxed. If I wanted to take an evening off, I kind of could. And sometimes I'd stay a little bit later as well. So we had a few classrooms that stayed open till 4:30 for the sixth formers. So sometimes I'd just kind of opt to stay at school and get it done before I went home. So I didn't have to mess around or anything like that. So just do whatever works for you. Obviously try new things. If it doesn't work, then you've only kind of spent the day doing it. Right, so on to the next part. So I've linked it together. It's very relevant. Your working environment. So since most of you work in your rooms, as we saw from the poll, you can control quite a lot about the space that you work in. So the first thing is listening to music. So listening to music is an absolute favorite of mine when I'm kind of churning out the more boring stuff. So when I'm sort of writing new notes, or I'm just kind of reading something that I need to do, not necessarily the kind of harder stuff like doing exam questions. But I really love listening to music. It makes it go so much quicker. But it's also kind of interesting to consider what type of music you're listening to, depending on the type of work. So I tend to just listen to music that I normally like when I'm doing the easier stuff. But if I'm doing something harder, then I'll listen to maybe something without vocals or lyrics. because it's a little bit easier to concentrate. I don't kind of get caught up and stuff like that. I'd say if you're doing really hard exam questions, you should try to mimic the kind of conditions that you're going to be under when you sit the tests. So try to get comfortable with working in silence when you're doing the really tricky stuff. Obviously, you shouldn't be doing hard questions all day. I'd say just sort of one paper a day maximum is all you should ever really be doing. Try to spread them out, otherwise you're just going to exhaust yourself. But try and take that time to ditch the music, just really focus, get comfortable with the silence, and just really concentrating on what you're doing. So yeah, I mean, there's not really any kind of research on what kind of music is best. My auntie swears by classical music. She says that apparently that improves memory and retention. She probably saw it in an article somewhere. But I'd take sort of, you know, Taylor Swift over Beethoven any day. I don't really think there's much point. So just listen to whatever you enjoy, but consider when the best times to listen to music is. So where we're working makes a massive difference, as we've gone over. So when you're working in your room, keeping it tidy can have a massive mental boost and help you feel a bit more collected and organized. There's a lot of studies that say if the space around us is organized, it makes us feel better as well. We've spoken about a bit of variety as well. So maybe working at schools, working at sort of your town library. I know sort of mine, when I was doing my A-levels, was open 9 till 5. So it's a really good place to work when we were on study leave for our GCSEs. And it had a collaborative area. So a few of my friends that did the same subjects would get together and we'd go through exam questions once we'd all sat them and things like that. But obviously this doesn't work for everyone. So, you know, try new things, but don't massively change what you're doing now if it's already working for you. I've spoken about my dream of not having a desk in my room already, so I think that about covers it. So yeah, big one from here is study groups. I really recommend study groups. I don't think I would have done as well in my A-levels if not for kind of getting together with my class. We kind of do it every weekend or every other weekend because our teacher semi-forced us to, because he was the one who introduced us to the idea. But it really made a sense of kind of camaraderie between us. Like we were all working together, we were all trying to help each other do better and teach each other how to do the subject better. It was a really nice sort of feeling between all of us. And it was quite a small class as well. There were only sort of 5 of us, which I think is quite common for a few A-level classes. I know that's just sort of how it was at my school. So I'd say if you're not doing sort of group classes, or if you're in year 12 and you're going into year 13 next year, maybe consider sort of talking to a few of your friends who do the same subjects as you and trying to do something regular. Makes it a lot easier to motivate yourself as well if you're like me and you struggle with that. Okay, on to the next thing. So I've spent way too much time there. Active learning. So there's a study that found that passively listening, which is kind of what we tend to do in lessons when we're just kind of absorbing content, when somebody's just talking at us, it's almost impossible to concentrate for more than 20 minutes at a time if you are just passively listening. So university lecture formats are really guilty of this because university lectures are 50 minutes long. But you can only concentrate for 20 minutes and there's very rarely any time to ask questions. You're just kind of listening to a presentation. There's usually some slides on the board. So the way we kind of get around this is by actively learning. So actively learning is sort of switching up whatever sense you're using to learn. So you may have heard before of different types of learners. So you may have heard of like auditory learners or visual learners, or kind of people who learn by doing, which is called kinesthetic. And you can kind of work out through sort of online tests and stuff what your best learning type is. You probably all have a preference as well. I think this gets mentioned quite a lot. Really, the best way to learn is to do all three. Your brain responds really well to variation. So if you're able to sort of talk out loud about what you're doing, maybe explain it to somebody else, obviously listening to it in the first place is probably how you're going to learn it originally, and then reading it on a paper or writing out your notes. All of these things put together is a really sort of, well, it makes it a bit more interesting as well, but it's a really good way to learn something quickly. You're much more likely to remember it if you can associate it to many different senses. rather than just kind of watching a video or listening to your teacher talk about it. So I think I've given a few sort of examples here. So yeah, another sort of common one is learn one, do one, teach one. So this is actually something that surgeons use to learn how to perform surgeries. You get taught how to do something, then you do one yourself. So say with maths questions, this is probably the best analogy. So you learn, you do a maths question, and then you teach somebody else how to do the same topic. So again, I'm very big on group work, so you'll probably hear me harp on about that a little bit more. That's the general theme. So next topic, learning pyramid. So the idea behind this is that essentially in order to do exams, which is kind of application and analysis, first of all, we need to be able to understand. And before we can understand, we need to actually remember what we're talking about. So the idea is that you obviously can't understand more than you know in the first place. So revision is all about base building. It's about getting your memory as good as, like, to a higher level as you can. So remembering as much about your topic as you possibly can, and then understanding as much as you possibly can about what you've learned. So revision, while those two basic blocks at the bottom are really important and will get you quite a lot of marks in the exam, your kind of higher end marks, especially the sort of essay subjects or science subjects, are going to come from application and analysis, which you can only really practice by doing exam questions. Sort of modern GCSE and A levels are so technical in their nature with the higher end questions that if you took somebody who was an absolute expert on a subject, maybe they'd studied at university, and so they had all of the sort of memory and understanding in the world, and you put them in front of an A-level paper, it's really unlikely that they would score an A-star, just because you have to be so familiar with the wording and the technicalities and the little quirks that go behind doing A-level exam papers that you just have to have seen them before. You have to have seen the mark schemes, you have to understand how they work. So while revision, very, very important for those blocks, just remember exam questions are also necessary to kind of fine tune before exam season and kind of get ready there. And then sort of the last thing on sort of revision itself that I've got for you before we do another poll is this graph. This was my physics teacher's favorite graph, and it basically explains how often you should be revising the same topic. So the idea is the first time you learn something, you're going to forget all about it extremely quickly. Good analogy for this is learning names. So when you first meet somebody, or at least I'll talk from my own experience, when I first meet somebody, I pretty much always forget their name unless I kind of repeat their name over and over and over in my head while I'm staring straight at them and talking to them and not trying to look like I'm concentrating super hard. But the second time you meet them, and then maybe you're kind of embarrassed and you ask them their name again, or they remind you, it gets a little bit easier to remember. And then the third time, by then you probably remember their name for the rest of your life out of embarrassment if you've forgotten it twice in a row, in my case, or maybe your memory's just better than mine. So the idea here is that if you learn a topic, let's say back in year 12 before Christmas, and then you revise it once more before your end of year 12 mocks maybe, and then again in the first term of year 13, and then again straight before your exams, you'll have gone through this process of remembering, learning, forgetting, learning again and forgetting, and so on 3 or 4 times. And that really strengthens your memory and understanding of a topic, especially because every time you revise it, you're probably going to sort of understand a bit more than you did last time, remember a little bit more than you did, and so on. This worked really well for my sort of more technical subjects, so where understanding was really important. So something like physics, where you're kind of doing the same, I guess, concepts over and over again, but as you kind of get older and understand a little bit more of the wider context, it gets a lot easier to remember and understand. So yes, this graph, very important, kind of how I structured all of my revision in A levels. And I wish I'd kind of followed this graph a bit more closely when I was at university. I was a little bit more disorganized because I didn't have a teacher telling me what to do. But if I'd followed this, I would have had a much easier time. So we'll do the next poll. So what type of learner are you? So if you figured out your learning style, or you've sort of been told it before, or you've done an online test, or really just sort of whichever one you think you associate with more. I'd be really interested to know. I'm quite a sort of doing learner. I'm a bit of a fidgeter, as you may have been able to tell. So I quite sort of like making things and sort of drawing diagrams and so on. So that tends to be how I do most of my revision. And computer science is quite practical with programming and everything. So I'm usually messing around with something there as well. Yeah, as I thought, so most people agree with me, which is good. Makes me feel very validated. So yeah, as I said, all three are great, and mixing it up, variation is the key to learning. But I could kind of guess that through doing is maybe how most of you would learn as well. Okay, fantastic. Right, so we'll do some revision methods that I use. I'm just a little bit conscious of time, and then we'll finish off with some sort of ending notes. So you may have heard of this one before, the Pomodoro technique. It's very popular and very, very simple. The rough idea is that you come up with a task that you need to do. So it might be revising a specific topic or chapter, and you assign yourself 25 minutes strictly. So you use a timer, let's say. After that 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break, which is enough time to go sort of make yourself a cup of tea or sort of go on your phone. I usually just go on my phone and watch a YouTube video. But then after that 5 minutes is up, you get back to work and you do another 25-minute interval. And then if you finish whatever you were doing in that 25-minute interval, you immediately start the next task. I find that this one's a really good way to just get going and just get started on something, because I'm not really sort of as in control of kind of going, oh, well, maybe if I just did this instead. It's kind of like, no, we just go, we're working for 25 minutes now. I just have to get as much as I possibly can done within that time. And then after you've done a few of these intervals, so you can kind of choose how many, I'd say probably 2 to 4 is good. So if you're doing quite intense work, less intervals. If you're doing sort of, less intense work, more intervals, and so on. So after 3 or 4, you take a long break. So a long break should be at least an hour. So this works quite well. I'd say 2 hours is quite a solid amount of time to be doing straight up revision for anyway. I probably wouldn't try to do much more than that in a kind of half of the day. So if I'd just gotten home from school sort of after 4 p.m, I probably wouldn't end up working for more than 2 hours an evening anyway during the kind of normal portion of the year. I know things get a little bit more hectic when you're kind of approaching exams, but this kind of helps to ensure that you're taking regular breaks and you're not going to burn yourself out. After all, there's no point in kind of burning out within a week when you've still got a month to go before your exams. The kind of revision that you're doing needs to be sustainable. You need to be able to keep it up for a long period of time. And you're not going to do that if you don't take breaks. Next is time boxing. So this is for more kind of practical work. So maybe an essay or a coursework, or in my case, programming. I learned this one when I was doing an internship. Basically, the way it works is if you have a problem that you're trying to solve, so an essay or a coursework, and you are getting stuck, you just assign a certain amount of time to it. And you just tell yourself that if you, like, no matter what, you're just going to stop after that amount of time. So no matter what point you're at. And it kind of stops you from wasting time on things that you're completely stuck on, that you would benefit from just going away, doing something else, and then maybe coming back to it in a few days. So I tend to get stuck on stuff all the time. It's just the nature of doing something sort of problem solving and practical. So I kind of have to force myself to step away, even when I really, really don't want to, because I'm incredibly frustrated that I just can't get something. So for studying as well, this might be, if you really struggle with science or something that's kind of got more conceptual understanding that's just kind of difficult to get to, I would really recommend this one. So don't spend more than, half an hour trying to understand something and then come back to it another day. The important thing is obviously to make a note of the thing that you couldn't understand so that you do come back to it. Don't just kind of forget about it completely or kind of, just bury it. You do eventually need to come back to it, but maybe not that day. And then finally, memory tricks and rote learning. So for the really grim parts of revision where you just need to remember straight up facts or dates or something like that, my trick for rote learning is little and often. So first thing I do, just kind of remembering back to when I was doing A levels, our physics teacher had us memorize certain sentences and notes, basically definitions type stuff. So what we would do is we'd obviously have to start by reading off the notes that we wanted to learn, and we'd do this on our own as well. Usually then I would kind of speak out loud what I'm trying to remember. So say a sentence. So I think one that I remember is like scalar vectors have quantity, not magnitude, e.g. distance, speed, time. So I would repeat those out loud over and over again until I didn't need to look at what I was reading in order to do that. So I'd kind of do it in my head and then look and check to make sure that I'd gotten it right. And then when I could do a few of them by just speaking out loud and remembering short term, then I would cover them up and I'd do the same thing. And then once I kind of got into grips with that, I would start writing them while it's covered and then checking that what I'd written corresponds to, you know, what I'm trying to learn. And if you kind of do that cycle of around 15 minutes in a session, and you do that session once or twice a day fairly regularly, it's a really quick way to learn stuff. Obviously, it doesn't even take that long if you're doing dates. The important thing is to just do little sessions very often. So if you really, really need to learn a date for something in history or a collection of dates, you can just make a list of all of them and then just constantly test yourself on them. Usually just the process of trying to force yourself to remember completely from scratch actually helps your memory, even if you're not remembering them. Just the fact that you're trying to, and then eventually you see what it is you're trying to learn really helps. So that's the end of my tips. So another sort of big question is how much revision? I'm sure a lot of you are very curious about that. So here's my advice on it. Obviously, it is complicated because it depends on sort of who you are, what subjects are doing, how many subjects, where you are in the year, and so on. It really does fluctuate throughout. So first of all, consider how many subjects you have, or better yet, how many exam papers. Different exam papers have different ways of revising for them. So within two different subjects, or even within the same subject, two exam papers, you might need to prep more or less for one of them. Priorities. So when I was doing my GCSEs, I spent about double the amount of time on my English literature paper than I did my maths. And I still did a lot of work on maths because I needed it for my A levels, but that was solely because I was awful at English literature. I just didn't get poetry at all. Some people might relate, hopefully. So I had to spend way more time on it because it was just a really, really weak subject for me. And that's, you know, perfectly natural, especially at GCSE. No one's kind of just all round good at everything. So make sure you're kind of thinking about what you find difficult and trying to put as much of your time there as well. But obviously don't neglect subjects, even if you think you're really strong and really confident with them. Obviously, you know, no one really likes to say it, but some subjects are more important than others. So if you are thinking of doing certain subjects at A level, or if you've been accepted to do them at A level, they will probably have grade requirements. Whatever sixth form college you're going to, or maybe you're doing an apprenticeship or something, you'll often have requirements for specific GCSEs. So it is worth prioritizing those, but it's also important to make sure that you're getting at least a pass in everything else as well. But I know for quite a lot of people, they'd be asked to prioritize sort of maths, like getting a 7, or, you know, physics for me when I was doing my A levels, and obviously work in chunks. So don't work straight, spread it out over time. I really don't think revising for more than 2 hours a day on a school night is ever a good idea. You want to make sure that what you're doing is sustainable, which brings me on to, again, my point of little and often. Don't work for 12 hours straight. Pomodoro can help with that. It's way more effective to do 3 1-hour chunks over a few days than it is to do 3 hours straight. Consider how intense your work is. So kind of an idea that we've talked about a lot today. So reading stuff and learning, you know, just kind of reading over your notes or making notes is generally quite easy work. So mentally, it's not very exhausting, whereas exam papers are extremely mentally exhausting. So you need to be wary of that when you're planning your breaks, or sort of thinking about how much work you've actually done that day. And also another tip is to do your hard stuff first. So you have more energy when you start working in a day. you really only have so much energy for the really difficult creative stuff within a day. So I know quite a lot of my friends, myself included, we weren't really fans of like breakfast revision at schools. So the kind of revision that you sometimes do when you come in early before an exam. It's always personal preference. Some people really found them useful, but we kind of thought we'd try and keep ourselves fresh, because we found if we got up a bit earlier and started doing work before the exam, rather than kind of warming us up, it just made us feel a little bit more tired. But you should never really do kind of exam prep, as in exam questions and really difficult stuff on the day or the night before an exam anyway. You should always try and keep everything nice and chill, make sure you have plenty of energy. So brings me on to final notes. Obviously, very good time to submit questions if you haven't already. To summarize, our brain is like a muscle. Muscles like to be stretchy, and our brains therefore like to be stretchy. So take care of yourself. Your brain is a muscle, just like you would take care of your body if you were doing lots and lots of exercise. Take regular breaks. Don't stop doing things that you enjoy. If you like exercising, keep doing that. Yeah, don't burn yourselves out. Make sure the work you're doing is sustainable. Just kind of ask yourself, could I kind of keep working at this pace for as long as I need to? You know, I'm in quite a busy revision period myself, because university exams are coming up and my final dissertation is due in a month. But I'm trying to make sure that I'm not working any more than I wouldn't be able to sustain for a month. So not doing all-nighters, not doing extremely late nights, and so on. We talked about lots of techniques today. So Pomodoro is a big one, but active learning, time boxing, and memory tricks. Try to take something from this session and maybe apply it in your own revision. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world, but it's always good to try new things and develop your own revision strategies, but they're bound to sort of shift over time anyway. And then finally, revision scheduling, little and often, take breaks, vary it up, and don't just revise something once and forget about it. Make sure you've got a kind of plan to revise it maybe shortly before your exams, now that we're a bit later in the year. So if you revise something within April, maybe just sort of make a mental note of it to go over quickly near the end of May as well, just to make sure it's a little bit more fresh before your exam, because you can't cover the entire subject a day before, as I found out the hard way. So yeah, that's pretty much everything from me. If you're really interested and really keen, here's some of the science that I looked at when I was making this. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening to me talk for 40 minutes, and I would love to take some questions from you.
Thank you, Jack. That was so useful. I really wish I'd had your advice when I was at school. And yeah, and just regarding those slides and the references you showed there, we can share around these slides to everyone here in an email we'll send tomorrow morning. So we'll send that along with the recording of this event as well, so you can come back to it for reference. And yeah, and we've got a nice handful of questions here, and so Jack, I can just read them out for you, and you can answer if that works. Cool. So our first question came in here from Ibby. As time is approaching for our GCSEs, how does someone manage to divide time between all topics in chosen subjects?
Yeah, so really good question. So I think when I was doing my GCSEs, I tried to timetable it a little bit. So I tried to think about days where I was actually doing those subjects at school, because I think at GCSEs, your timetables are still quite packed. You're doing sort of around 24, 25 lessons a week. So if you have a day where, say, you've got a double period of maths, it's sometimes quite useful to schedule your maths revision for the day after that, because you'll have probably kicked up quite a lot of new stuff, or maybe you've gone over something in maths that you know that you're a little bit weaker on, you've kind of identified something. So it's kind of good to do it while you're still relatively fresh and you remember what you were struggling with the next day. Obviously, because GCSE is so many subjects, I think when I was in sort of deep revision mode, so around about sort of March, April, around now, if you're a year 11, I was putting 2 subjects on each weekday. So I'd do around about 45 minutes on each. I try and split it evenly. So say like 2 totally, I'd say try not to do 2 totally unrelated subjects. So if you're revising, say science, like for me, I was doing triple science, so they counted as separate GCSEs. So I'd do biology and chemistry on the same day. and then physics and maths on a different day, English and English language or English and history on a different day, and so on. Obviously the weekends I just kind of used for whatever homework I had or whatever I was struggling with at the time. I just tried to keep those fairly free. But as far as structure goes, yeah, just try to lump relevant stuff together and try to do little and often.
Great. I've got another question here from James. I've heard that mind mapping is a good way of practicing analysis, linking things together and stuff. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. So I think this really helps with memory as well. So I kind of touched on this earlier, but I like to do mind maps as a kind of memory exercise. So rather than kind of reading anything before, I would just sit down and I would try to plot a mind map of a topic or kind of a chapter, so something a little bit bigger within a subject, and then just write down everything that I remember about it, sort of every fact, every kind of little detail. And then I would kind of spot where my gaps are, kind of what I haven't remembered. I could kind of make a note of it, and then fill it in by, you know, checking my textbooks and sort of watching videos on it and stuff like that. So I think it's a really good way to actively recall and actively remember stuff, but also kind of identify what you don't remember or what you don't understand as much.
Great. So pro mind maps, but I guess for others listening, it's whatever works for you as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. And question here from Calvin. What do you think is an ideal ratio to have between revision and exam practice? Does this vary much between subjects?
Yeah, so another good one. So I think it's worth bearing in mind that there's kind of two main aspects when you're going into an exam. There's how much you remember and how technically proficient you are at sitting that exact paper. So this is kind of where the variation between people comes in. So when you sit your mock exam papers, or you're just doing practice questions, when you go through and mark it, try to actively think about why you're getting questions wrong. So rather than just kind of marking them wrong, understanding the answer and move on, think to yourself, did I get that wrong because I didn't know the answer, or did I get it wrong because I misread the question, I got caught out on a silly mistake, I forgot to do this little bit, but actually I did kind of know what was going on and I had all the information I needed to answer it. I just got it wrong still. If you're kind of in that category, like I was really guilty of making loads of really small, really kind of careless errors when I was doing exam papers, then you should practice exam papers more. But if you're kind of getting to a question and you're being held back by your lack of content knowledge, then obviously that's something you can solve with revision. Rough split, I'd say kind of as a starting point, 70-30 revision exam practice, just to answer the question.
Nice one. And another question here from Ibby. Do you recommend investing in anything like a MacBook or a PC to keep your work online and not all on paper?
I think it's sort of less necessary than it used to be. Sort of since I got to university, I do kind of work with quite a lot of tech and stuff. That's more just kind of me being a bit hobbyist, and also with computer science, I guess I'm just more interested in it. What I would say is just having something reliable to access sort of videos and kind of keep a decent store of notes and online stuff is a really good idea. So you can do that with quite a cheap laptop or like a little tablet, or even on sort of phones, you can sort of bookmark things. So when I was in school, I would always take photos of the whiteboard, because our physics teacher was really old school and he wouldn't use anything electronic. So he would just write on the whiteboard, or when we were smaller class size, he would just write on plain paper and then just pass it to us when he was done to take photos of. So I kind of keep those organized. I mean, if you have something like a tablet that you can draw on, I really enjoy those. So I did most of my university notes on a tablet, like with a pen, like a digital pen, and it was a lot of fun. But really, I just kind of take my notes on plain paper most of the time, because it's easy and it's quite free for me. I can sort of do whatever I want with it. So to sort of summarize, it's really not necessary, but if you feel like you'll work better, then absolutely do. But you can keep things fairly organized with just your phone and a really sort of cheap computer. You don't really need anything too fancy.
Yeah, I'd agree. As someone who the internet did exist when I was at school, but ed tech hadn't really taken off, and people got good grades just revising with papers. So if you don't have the budget for an iPad, it shouldn't be a deal breaker, I would say. And another an anonymous question here, again, just about time studying. So do you think it's still okay to spend some time, maybe at night, to watch or do something like that? Or do you think that time should be spent revising, especially as we're close to GCSEs? So I think this is a question on like how much do you revise later in the evening versus just chill out?
Yeah, I think I understand. So just as like a preface, sometimes needs must, sometimes we've all kind of been there where we've been a little bit disorganized and we need to work later than is ideal. And I'm not saying that is always the end of the world. I'm just saying try not to make a habit of it. My kind of advice here is try to make sure you've got time to do something that is nothing to do with studying before you go to bed. So at the moment, I'm in a bit of a habit where I'm at the library till quite late because I'm working on writing up my master's, which is more practical than revision. But I always make sure that I've got at least an hour by the time I get home before I go to bed to read or do something completely different and kind of take my mind off of it. So I'm not going to bed thinking about work because then I just don't sleep as well. So again, this kind of goes back to energy levels. Try not to do anything super high energy after dinner. You'll have eaten, so all of the blood has gone from your brain to your stomach anyway. You're not going to be able to think as creatively or as sharply. Do your best not to work too late into the evening, but always make sure you've got time to wind down, would be my advice, if you have to, because we do live in the real world, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a couple of similar questions here, which you covered a bit in terms of your preference, I think, but just a popular question. Do you think it's better to study at night or in the morning? I guess that question misses out the other option, which is the afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to choose, I think the morning is way better. If I could choose to be a morning person, I absolutely would. Getting half my work done before lunch would feel immense. I kind of go through phases where I'm more of a morning person and I'm less of a morning person. At the moment, I'm kind of taking my own advice and I just sleep a lot because I'm doing so much work. So I tend to feel a little bit groggier in the mornings. So I kind of take it easy on myself and tend to start work around sort of 11ish, and then I'll kind of work until 5 or 6 with a lunch break. And like that's kind of sort of what your school hours are, but your school hours would just be shifted back by 2 to 9. So I'm not really doing much more work during the day than any of you, but then I'll work a couple of hours in the evening as well. So I think, again, really personal preference, but if you're kind of like me and it kind of makes you feel more calm to have a lot of your work out of the way, and studying in the morning is good. But don't force yourself to do something that's gonna make you feel bad long term. If you're not sleeping because you're waking up super early to do work, or if you're not sleeping because you're staying up super late to do work, then that becomes an issue quite quick.
Yeah, and prioritizing looking after yourself, because when you're well, you're able to study best. Is something you said there, which is really key as well. And probably just trying out studying different times and seeing what kind of routine you can craft for yourself will probably help you find what works. But trying
absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. And so just 3 minutes left here. Let's see, a few interesting questions here. I'll try and pick one that's popular. A lot of questions on like how many hours to revise in a day on study leave. I guess you just want like a specific answer, but there probably isn't one.
I'd say like no more than 8. 8 is a pretty solid number for, that's how many hours people usually work, if you want to think of it like that. So if you sort of did, I guess, like 8:30 till 10:30 with a break, 11:30 till 1:30 and so on, then you wouldn't be working sort of super late into the evening. That's kind of what I would say. Again, depends on the type of work. If you're hitting exam papers back to back. So I remember when I was doing my GCSEs, if I wanted to study maths or if I had a test very soon, then I would just do like, 3 or 4 exam papers in a day, which really was not the way to do it. That was a mistake. I'd say just vary it up. Do the harder stuff first. So maybe 1 or 2 exam papers if you've got the full day for study leave. And then kind of as the day goes on, as you get into the afternoon, once you've a couple of hours after you've had lunch, do some easier stuff, because you'll be knackered, basically. But I'd say no more than 8 hours. So I'd say five-ish is probably going to be your average hours of revision, and that is absolutely fine.
Good. You're giving the answers we want. And then very last question here. One question from Anonymous. So if you haven't reached your predicted grade yet, so I guess in your studies, what is the best thing to do?
Yeah, that's really fair. So by not reaching your predicted grades, I'm assuming you mean sort of you haven't gotten grades on mocks that reflect your predicted grades yet. I think it's important to remember that there's always like time before your exams, and it's kind of what I mentioned a bit earlier. You want to kind of address the specific issues that are stopping you from getting certain grades. I kind of gave advice to one of my tutees the other day, which was to try not to think about exam papers just in terms of, what can I do to go from like, a 5 to a 6 or something, and just try to think of how to optimize the number of marks you're getting. So if you're getting a topic wrong because you don't know the content, revise more. If you're getting a topic wrong for some other like silly reason, talk to your teacher about it, understand like what about the exam question threw you off and like why you couldn't get it right, even though you probably knew enough to get it right, and try to address those issues. So it's kind of work smart, not hard. Exam papers are technical. They're not a perfect indication of how well you understand or remember something. There is a kind of aspect of technique to them, and you can definitely kind of optimize how you do them. If we really wanted to test exactly how well you understood or remembered something, then exam boards would pay somebody to sit in a room with you and have a conversation with you about a subject for an hour. But that's never going to happen. So they have to do it by written papers. So just try to keep that in mind, that there are ways to sort of learn the tricks, learn what you're kind of doing that you could be doing better. Really, I'd say just try and get into that mindset of like, okay, why am I getting these things wrong? And what can I do to fix them, rather than just, I must work harder.
Great answer. Thank you so much, Jack. And we're now up to our allocated time, so that's been an hour. Thank you so much for your advice, Jack, and thank you everyone so much for asking questions and for contributing in the chat there. It's been really nice to have you all here today. As you leave, if you have a second to just answer this yes or no exit poll, that would be great. And other 2 things are, we'll share the recording of today's event as well as the slides that Jack spoke from, so you can have both of those to help you with your revision in the next few weeks. And and finally, just a huge, massive, big good luck to everyone. Just look after yourself, take as many of these pieces of advice as you can, and don't be too hard on yourself as well. In IBI, we've got live events on Instagram and TikTok every week in the next few weeks. So if you follow us on Instagram at MyTutor and on TikTok, MyTutor UK, we're going to be having lots more live events on there for you. And thank you, Jack, and thanks everyone. Bye.